For centuries, maps have featured lands and cities that never existed, capitals of mighty empires that vanished without a trace, islands that would rise and disappear on the horizon, kingdoms described in vivid detail that might never have been real at all. Explorers risked everything to find them. Governments documented them as fact. But what if it was all just a mistake? Or worse, a well-told lie? Today you're going to discover the historical places that maybe were never real to begin with. Camelot. If you grew up hearing stories about brave knights, noble kings, and magical swords, then the name Camelot is probably etched into your imagination. The capital of King Arthur's realm, home of the Knights of the Round Table. Courage was the highest virtue, a land where justice ruled, and magic, well, it operated quietly in the background. But what if I told you Camelot never existed? It wasn't quite like the legends say. No, it never existed. The most fascinating part of this story is that Camelot doesn't come from ancient times. Its first appearance is in a French poem from the 12th century, Lancelot, the Knight of the Cart. The author, Chrétien de Troyes, a court poet. He came up with Camelot as part of a romantic narrative. In other words, Camelot wasn't even part of the earliest King Arthur stories. It was a later invention, introduced by someone writing fiction. Yet over time, it somehow gained the weight of reality. For centuries, scholars and adventurers tried to track down Camelot among real castles across Britain. Cadbury Castle, Caerleon, Tintagel, all of them have been labeled the real Camelot at some point. But there's not a shred of archaeological evidence to support any of it. No foundations, no inscriptions, nothing. And yet, Camelot endured. It became a symbol of an ideal. It inspired books, films, and even presidents. John F. Kennedy's administration in the United States was famously nicknamed Camelot, a time of hope, youth, and political grace, all because the myth proved more powerful than any fact. Camelot never existed, but that never stopped the world from dreaming about it. Atlantis. When it comes to lost civilizations, nothing tops Atlantis, an advanced maritime empire with superior technology, flawless architecture, and a utopian society, until, suddenly, it vanished beneath the waves in a single day, a mythical downfall that sparked centuries of searching, speculation, and disappointment. But here's the hard truth. There is absolutely no evidence that Atlantis ever existed. It all starts around the year 360 before Christ, when Plato first mentions Atlantis in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, but he never presented it as a historical account. On the contrary, Atlantis was a philosophical allegory, a fictional narrative he crafted to illustrate the moral decay of a proud and arrogant society. The problem? Plato was a master storyteller, and by the 19th century, a few ambitious thinkers decided to treat his tale as a lost archaeological record. Writers like Ignatius Donnelly popularized the idea that Plato was describing a real civilization, perhaps destroyed by a massive cataclysm. From there, the wild theories took off. Atlantis might be in the Mediterranean, or in Antarctica, or somewhere in the Americas, or submerged off the coast of the Bahamas. None of those theories have ever been confirmed. And what does science say? Geologists, oceanographers, and archaeologists are clear. There's no way an entire continent could sink without leaving a trace, and everything we know about the ocean floor shows that Atlantis just isn't there. Still, the lost city never really left our imagination. Hy-Brasil. For centuries, sailors navigating the North Atlantic spoke of a mysterious island glowing on the horizon, just west of Ireland. It showed up on medieval nautical charts, had a marked location, and, according to legend, could only be seen once every 7 years, vanishing like a ghost soon after. Its name? Hy-Brasil. And no, it has nothing to do with the country in South America. The name Hy-Brasil comes from the Celtic word Brisel, which may mean the exalted one, or the High King. But the name isn't the important part. What matters is this: the island never existed, never. And still, it was drawn on maps for over 500 years. Hy-Brasil first appeared in cartographic records in the 14th century, often shown as a small, perfectly round island, split in half by a river or channel. Explorers genuinely set out to find it. One of them was the navigator John Cabot. In the 15th century, he left England believing he might stumble upon Hy-Brasil, and instead, he found the shores of what we now call Canada. So in a strange twist, an island that never existed may have accidentally helped lead to the rediscovery of North America. But why did so many believe? There were scattered reports of sightings, dense sea fog, and optical illusions caused by light refraction, all of which kept the myth alive. Some claimed Hy-Brasil was a hidden paradise, home to wise beings with advanced knowledge. Others believed it was a Celtic version of Atlantis. The fact remains, no one ever set foot on it. By the 19th century, Hy-Brasil started disappearing from maps. Scientists had thoroughly explored and mapped the region, confirming the obvious: there was no island there. Still, the legend refused to die. In UFO lore, there's even a wild theory that Hy-Brasil is actually a cloaked alien base, and in fantasy fiction, it still pops up now and then as a magical land that slips through the cracks of reality. The Kingdom of Prester John. In the heart of the Middle Ages, while bloody crusades raged in the Middle East, a spark of hope began to spread through European courts. Somewhere far away, there existed a legendary Christian kingdom, ruled by an immortal priest-king, blessed with endless riches, mythical creatures, and a mighty army ready to help Christendom in its fight against the Muslims. This kingdom was known as Prester John. The story first surfaced in a mysterious letter, supposedly sent by the king himself to the Pope and the Byzantine Emperor in the 12th century. In it, Prester John described a paradise-like empire, where the fountain of youth flowed, illnesses were cured through faith, and 72 peaceful kingdoms lived in harmony, all under his divine rule. The letter was a sensation. It was copied, translated, and circulated all across Europe. For centuries, people truly believed Prester John was real. At first, they thought his kingdom was in India. When that proved impossible, the map shifted to Central Asia, then to Ethiopia. With every disappointment, the location changed, but the belief remained. The obsession went deep. The hope for a miraculous alliance led countries like Portugal and Spain to fund expeditions to find him. In fact, the Age of Discovery was partially fueled by the dream of locating Prester John's realm. But nothing. No golden city, no army with shining crosses, no priest king who had lived for 500 years. It was all myth, a tangled web of rumors, exaggerations, and cultural misunderstandings. What's even more intriguing is that some parts of the legend were likely inspired by real Christian kingdoms, like Ethiopia, which had practiced Christianity for centuries, but had absolutely nothing to do with Prester John. Still, European explorers kept trying to connect the dots, because they needed to believe there was someone out there fighting for the same God. Prester John never showed up, but for centuries, he stood as a symbol of hope, of faith, and of humanity's uncanny ability to turn longing into geography. El Dorado. Picture an entire city covered in gold, shimmering temples, sunlit streets glowing with brilliance, and rivers where golden dust floated like enchanted mist. To the Spanish conquistadors, this wasn't a fantasy, it was El Dorado, and they were willing to cross jungles, deserts, and mountain ranges to find it. The obsession with El Dorado began in the 16th century, when explorers heard indigenous legends about a king who covered his body in gold dust before diving into a sacred lake, a ritual offering to the gods. This ceremony really existed among the Muisca people, in the region we now know as Colombia, but the Spanish took the story of one golden king and inflated it into something much bigger, an entire city made of gold. And from that point on, the world went mad. Expeditions launched from every direction in search of the golden paradise. Conquistadors like Gonzalo Pizarro, Francisco de Orellana, and even the British explorer Walter Raleigh spent years combing the Amazon, the Andean highlands, and the depths of the Orinoco. Some died, others never returned. None found El Dorado, but that didn't stop the search. Every failure sparked a new rumor. El Dorado is further north. It's hidden behind that mountain range. It lies beneath the lake. Hope was fueled by greed and the blank spaces on the map. Centuries later, scientists like Alexander von Humboldt retraced those same paths and came to what now seems like an obvious conclusion. There is no lost city of gold in South America. Lake Guatavita, tied to the origin of the legend, was even dredged by colonizers. All it gave up were a few small artifacts, no treasure. Still, El Dorado lived on. The Lost City of Z. In the year 1925, a British explorer named Percy Fawcett entered the Amazon with an unshakable conviction. He was going to find an ancient, forgotten city, as advanced as the civilizations of Mesopotamia. A place that, according to him, would prove that the heart of the jungle held a grand and lost history. He called it Z, and he was never seen again. The legend of the lost city of Z began with Portuguese colonial documents and indigenous stories about stone ruins and mysterious societies deep in the interior of Brazil. Fawcett believed these accounts pointed to a lost civilization hidden within the green hell of the Amazon. And he believed it so deeply that he brought his teenage son with him, setting off with minimal supplies and no intention of coming back empty-handed. The result? Silence. No letters, no clues, no body. Fawcett vanished completely, only fueling the myth further. For decades, adventurers followed his path. Some disappeared as well. Others returned empty-handed. Meanwhile, newspapers, magazines, and even the British military speculated, did Fawcett find the city? Or was he swallowed by the very jungle he set out to understand? Here's the most fascinating part. We now know that the interior of the Amazon was indeed home to complex societies, like the Kuhikugu culture, which had organized roads, homes, and social networks. But these weren't stone cities, and they certainly didn't match the grand, monumental image Fawcett had in mind. Fawcett's Z probably never existed, at least not the way he imagined it. What did exist was the colonial desire to discover something that could rival the glory of ancient Egypt or imperial Rome, hidden deep within the jungle. Lamoria and Moo. Before we had satellites and tectonic models, the ocean floor was a blank canvas, the perfect place to project everything science couldn't yet explain. And in that vast unknown, two of the strangest lost continents in history were born, Lamoria and Moo. In 1864, a zoologist named Philip Sclater noticed something odd. Lemur fossils were found in both India and Madagascar, but not in Africa or the Middle East. How could that be? His answer: maybe there had once been a massive landmass connecting those regions, a continent now lost beneath the Indian Ocean. He called it Lemuria. The theory quickly gained traction. It made sense at the time, and if it could explain lemur migration, why not use it to account for other mysterious links between distant cultures? Then came the occult twist. Writers like Helena Blavatsky and James Churchward took the idea of Lemuria and added layers of mysticism, ancient advanced civilizations, telepathic beings, lost wisdom, and to top it off, another mythical land was introduced, Moo, a supposed Pacific continent that was claimed to be the original cradle of humanity. These ideas took hold in early 20th century pop culture and spiritual movements. But then, geology advanced, and reality hit hard. The theory of continental drift showed that entire continents don't just sink into the sea. What once seemed plausible became outdated science. Modern oceanographic mapping firmed it. There's no sunken continent where Lemuria or Moo were supposed to be. Even so, they never fully disappeared. Shangri-La. Imagine a hidden valley tucked between snow-capped mountains, a place where time slows down, where people live in peace, untouched by war, illness, or aging. That's the myth of Shangri-La, a perfect, unreachable refuge that lives in the imagination of millions. And it all began with a work of fiction. In 1933, British author James Hilton published the novel Lost Horizon. In the story, a plane crashes in the Himalayas, and the survivors are rescued by Tibetan monks who lead them to Shangri-La, a secret city nestled in the mountains, bathed in wisdom and near immortality. The book was such a success that the name Shangri-La quickly became shorthand for an earthly paradise. The problem? Despite what many believe, Shangri-La was never a Tibetan myth. It was a literary invention. Hilton was inspired by esoteric ideas like Shambhala, which does exist in Tibetan Buddhism, but only as a spiritual concept, not a physical location. Shangri-La, with its name, imagery, and mystique, came entirely from Hilton's imagination, and yet, the world believed it. Explorers searched for Shangri-La in valleys across Tibet, China, and Nepal. The Chinese government even renamed a town in Yunnan, Shangri-La, in the early 2000s to boost tourism. Today, visitors pose for pictures at the Shangri-La Gate, unaware they're standing in the middle of a geographical fiction. Even without historical roots, Shangri-La endured and spread. During the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt named his presidential retreat Shangri-La. It's now called Camp David. Agartha. Forget lost continents under the sea. Agartha goes further. It's said to be an entire civilization living inside the earth, not in caves, but in vast underground cities, lit by an internal sun and connected by secret tunnels that stretch across the planet. Welcome to the heart of the Hollow Earth theory. According to believers, Agartha is home to a superior race, wise, ancient, and technologically advanced. They supposedly retreated from the surface after ancient cataclysms. Not only did they survive, they thrived, and now, they live in hiding, quietly watching over humanity, waiting for the right moment to return. The idea gained momentum in the 19th century, when eccentric scientists, occultists, and spiritual writers began speculating about a hidden inner world. The name Agartha first appeared in 1886 in the writings of French author Alexandre Saint-Yves d'Alvedre, who mixed esotericism, politics, and spirituality. Later, writers like Ferdinand Ossendowski and movements like Theosophy blended Agartha with Eastern mysticism, especially with Buddhist legends such as Shambhala. But none of this has any scientific backing. The Earth is not hollow. We have seismographs, geological studies, satellite data. All of it shows that our planet is made of solid and molten layers, not habitable tunnels or hidden cities. And yet, Agartha persisted. During the Second World War, rumors claimed that the Nazis were searching for polar entrances to the hollow Earth. Later, wild theories suggested that Admiral Richard Byrd flew over a polar opening and witnessed beings from within, an event that never happened. Agartha became a theme in comic books, pseudoscience documentaries, and video games. In some modern versions, the Agarthans are even portrayed as aliens. Because, of course, if we can't find them above, maybe they're right beneath our feet. It's one of the wildest legends on this list, and at the same time, one of the most symbolic. The Kingdom of Sagune. In the early decades of French colonization in the Americas, a rumor swept through sailors, nobles, and even the royal court. Somewhere in the north of New France, what we now call Canada, there was a hidden kingdom, overflowing with silver, gold, and precious gems. A land as rich as the empires of the Aztecs or the Incas. This kingdom was known as Sagune. The man responsible for spreading the tale was Jacques Cartier, a French explorer who arrived in the Quebec region in 1535. During his expedition, he met the indigenous chief Donnacona, who spoke of a distant people, light-skinned, living far to the north, in lands rich with precious metals. To Cartier, it sounded like a northern version of El Dorado. When Donnacona was taken back to France, he repeated the story before the French king himself, fueling the fascination even further. The crown went so far as to plan expeditions specifically to search for Sagune. After all, if the Spanish were getting rich in South America, why couldn't the French have their own treasure empire in the north? But reality hit soon enough. None of the expeditions led to anything. No mines, no cities, no signs of an advanced civilization, and the most likely explanation? Donnacona may have been trying to impress, or mislead, his European visitors. Some historians believe he was referring to northern tribes who had access to copper, or perhaps sharing confused memories of Viking explorers. Either way, the outcome was the same. The Kingdom of Sagune was never found. Even so, the name lives on. Today, the Saguenay River region still echoes the legend, a legend that helped shape Canadian history and fueled French colonial ambition. Saguenay proves that golden myths don't only live in tropical jungles. Sometimes, the promise of riches gleams in the ice, only to vanish into the fog. The Mountains of Kong. For over a century, just about every European atlas confidently displayed a massive mountain range, stretching across West Africa from east to west. This range was long, detailed, complete with peaks and passes, and it even had a name, the Mountains of Kong. The problem? They never existed. It all started in the late 18th century, when British cartographer James Rennell attempted to map the source of the Niger River. Relying on second-hand oral accounts, vague observations, and a hefty dose of speculation, he guessed that a mountain range must exist in the region, and since no one had been there to prove otherwise, he simply drew it in, just like that. Soon, other maps copied the idea, and as those maps gained authority, fiction slowly turned into geographic fact. By the 19th century, almost every commercial map of Africa included the Mountains of Kong, as if they were a permanent fixture of the landscape. Explorers relied on those depictions, believing they were about to face a formidable chain of mountains that wasn't there. The myth finally unraveled in the late 1800s, when European expeditions crossed the area and found no such range, just plateaus and scattered hills. In 1889, French explorer Louis-Gustave Binger officially declared the Mountains of Kong to be a fabrication, and just like that, they began to quietly vanish from maps, as silently as they had appeared. But the story was never forgotten. The Mountains of Kong became a textbook example of how speculation can solidify into fact, a reminder that not everything printed on a map is real. Now tell me this, which of these places do you wish were actually real? Or better yet, what other historical myth do you think deserves a spot on this list? Drop it in the comments. I'm reading everything. Who knows, maybe you've got some obscure name no one's ever heard of, or a wild theory you've been sitting on for years. Now's the time to let it out. And hey, Your suggestion might just be the topic of our next video.